What if the monad was never something you find, but something that finds you the moment you stop performing the search for it? You meditate, you study, you strip away belief after belief, ego after ego, until you feel something settle inside you, a stillness you've never touched before. And you think, this is it. I made it. This is the monad. But ancient teachers who mapped this path in far more detail than most modern spirituality dares to warned about exactly this moment. Not the beginning of the journey, the end of it, because they believe the final illusion doesn't come dressed as chaos. It comes dressed as peace. I want to be honest with you before we go further. Most spiritual content stops right before this part. The beginner stuff, let go of ego, breathe, be present, because what comes after is uncomfortable. It doesn't sell well. Algorithms reward comfort. But I think that's exactly the conversation worth having. Because if you've been doing this work seriously, not casually, but for years, you've probably already felt something close to what I'm about to describe. Maybe you felt it once and never told anyone, because there wasn't language for it. Maybe you're feeling it right now, a little uneasy, without knowing why. And I think you deserve to know what ancient Gnostic teachers actually believed was waiting for you there. Not a comforting answer. A real one. This isn't beginner material. You already know the basics. What ego is, what stillness feels like, maybe even an experience that changed how you see everything. So let's go past all of that together. Let's go to the part almost nobody talks about on camera. In Gnostic teaching, there's a concept called the monad. It isn't a god you pray to. It isn't a figure with a face, a name, a temple built in its honor. The monad is described as the source before all sources, pure, undivided, unreachable by ordinary thought. Not a being among beings, but the condition that made being possible in the first place. Everything that exists is said to have unfolded from it, layer after layer, the way ripples move outward from a stone dropped in still water, each ring a little further from the center, a little less like the source that made it. But here's where it gets unsettling. Gnostic cosmology teaches that somewhere along that unfolding, a lesser force emerged, one that didn't understand it was lesser. It believed, mistakenly and completely, that it was the highest power there was. This force is called the Demiurge, and it's said to have built the world you're standing in right now. Not out of malice, necessarily. Out of ignorance, a craftsman convinced his workshop was the whole universe. It built a world so internally consistent that most people living inside it never once suspect it isn't the only reality there is. Every signal they receive from birth confirms it, built from the inside by something that believed its own design was the final truth. This idea is laid out most clearly in a text called the Apocryphon of John, one of the oldest and most detailed Gnostic writings we have. I remember the first time I really sat with what it was claiming. It wasn't the kind of idea you nod along to and move past. It suggests the world isn't lying to you with obvious lies, easy to catch. It's convincing you with a completely coherent, fully functioning reality, one with its own logic, built so well you'd have no reason to question it from inside. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a spiritual claim thousands of years old. And whether you take it literally or see it as ancient language for something more psychological, I think the deeper truth underneath it is worth sitting with. Because most of us have felt, at least once, that unsettling sense that the world we've been handed doesn't fully add up. That's the feeling this whole tradition was built to explain. Now, you already know the first trap. Almost everyone who's done real inner work has run into it at some point. It's spiritual bypassing. Chasing the feeling of peace instead of the truth underneath it. Using meditation to numb pain instead of understand it. Collecting insights like trophies instead of letting them change you. You've probably caught yourself doing this. I have too. It's not shameful, it's just the first layer of the trap, and most serious seekers eventually see through it. You notice yourself performing peace instead of living it. And once you notice it, something in you relaxes because you think the hard part is over. But here's the problem. Seeing through the first trap gives you confidence. And confidence, on this particular journey, is dangerous. Because the moment you believe you've outgrown illusion is exactly the moment a much subtler illusion is waiting, patient, for you to walk straight into it. The first trap is loud. It's easy to catch, once you know what to look for. The second one doesn't announce itself at all. Picture this. You're sitting in the quiet, hours into practice, the kind of session where time stops meaning anything. Your thoughts have gone soft, one by one, like a room slowly emptying out. The usual noise, the arguments in your head, the old wounds, the endless commentary running underneath everything you do. It's all gone still. For the first time, maybe ever, there's nothing pulling at you. No craving. No fear. No small voice narrating your life back to you. Just a wide, open silence that feels bigger than your own body. And something in you whispers, this is the monad. This is unity. I've finally arrived. You almost laugh, sitting there. Years of searching, books, teachers, false starts, quiet despair some nights, and here it finally is. This simple. This quiet. This close the whole time. But then, barely noticeable at first, something feels slightly off. Not wrong exactly. Just too neat. Too complete. Like the stillness was arranged for you rather than found by you. A small, cold thread of doubt slides in, quiet as the silence itself. What if this feeling isn't the end of the search? It's the search's last disguise. That thread of doubt. That's the most important moment in the entire journey. Because here's what Gnostic teaching suggests, and I find this genuinely chilling. The Demiurge's final and most effective trick isn't confusion, or chaos, or temptation. It's stillness. A manufactured peace that feels indistinguishable from real gnosis, real, liberating self-knowledge, but is actually just the ego wearing enlightenment like a mask, the most convincing costume it has ever worn. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent his career mapping the unconscious mind, warned about something similar in psychological terms centuries later. He noticed that the ego doesn't always disappear during spiritual growth. Sometimes it survives by absorbing the spiritual symbols themselves. It learns the language of surrender, learns to sit still, learns to speak about oneness, and then dresses itself up as the one who has arrived, quietly running the entire show from behind a far more convincing disguise. That's the trap. Not old chaos, old fear, a false finish line that feels exactly like the real one. Same stillness, same silence, same sense of arrival. The only difference is what's quietly still standing at the center of it, congratulating itself. And I'll be honest with you, I think this is why so many spiritual teachers, influencers, entire traditions get frozen right here and never move past it. Because once you feel that peace, questioning it feels like betrayal. Why would you doubt the single best thing you've ever felt? I've thought about this a lot, and here's my honest opinion. You're welcome to disagree with me. I think almost nobody talks about this stage because it's genuinely bad for business. You're almost enlightened sells courses and retreats. The peace you just found might be the ego's last trick, does not. It threatens the exact identity most spiritual content spends years building up in a person. The identity of the seeker who's finally arrived, finally different, finally above the noise everyone else is still tangled in. But real gnosis was never about arriving at a finish line and getting to stop. It was about waking up from a dream so total, you didn't even know you were asleep inside it. And you can't wake up while you're still lying there, congratulating yourself on how peaceful the dream has finally become. That's not comfortable content. But I think it's true content, and I'd rather tell you the uncomfortable version. In 1945, in the Egyptian desert near Nag Hammadi, a farmer digging for fertilizer struck a sealed clay jar, buried in the sand for over 1,500 years. Inside it were 52 ancient texts, hidden, most scholars believe, to protect them from destruction during a period when this teaching was considered dangerous enough to eliminate entirely. Dangerous enough to bury rather than let it be destroyed. Sit with that for a second. Someone centuries ago believed these ideas were worth the risk of hiding, trusting the desert to keep the secret longer than any living person could. One of those texts, the Gospel of Truth, describes gnosis not as gaining new information, but as waking up from forgetfulness. Like a person who's been dreaming a nightmare their entire life, and the moment of gnosis is simply the moment they open their eyes and realize none of it was ever solid to begin with. Not defeated, not escaped through effort, just seen through, all at once, the way a nightmare loses its grip the second you remember you're in bed. That's the last veil. It doesn't lift because you gained one more insight, or finally touched a perfect stillness after years of trying. It lifts the moment you stop needing to be the one who finally sees it lift. The moment the seeker themselves, not just their ego, but the very identity of person on a spiritual path getting closer every day, is recognized as part of the dream too. That's a strange, almost paradoxical idea, I know. The seeker has to see that the seeking itself was inside the illusion the whole time. But ancient teachers considered this the actual heart of the teaching, not a footnote. It was the whole point. So what does this actually ask of you? Not more effort, more retreats, more books stacked on your shelf as proof of how seriously you take this. It asks you to stop needing the finish line at all, to let go of the version of you that's been quietly proud, maybe even a little superior, about how far you've come. That's terrifying, if I'm honest. Because that identity, the seeker, the one getting closer with every year, might be the closest thing you have left to a sense of self after years of stripping everything else away. Letting that go doesn't feel like progress. It feels like losing the last thing you own. There's a line of thinking in the Gospel of Thomas that I think about often. The idea that what you're looking for isn't hidden somewhere far away, behind one more veil. It's already spread out in front of you, right now, and the only reason you can't see it clearly is that the searching self is looking too hard, too anxiously, to notice it was never actually separate from what it was seeking in the first place. I don't think that means stop practicing. I think it means practice without needing the practice to prove something about who you are. Sit without needing the sitting to make you someone. That's the difference, and it changes everything underneath. So here's what I'll leave you with. If you've ever touched a moment of stillness, so complete it felt like the answer, I'm not telling you it wasn't real. I'm asking you to stay curious about it anyway. Because the ancient teachers who mapped this path believe the last trap isn't a lie that feels false. It's a truth that feels too complete, too final, too much like the end of a story that was never actually meant to end that way. Maybe the monad was never something to arrive at. Maybe it was never a destination at all, just the quiet recognition that the one who was trying so hard to get there, all those quiet mornings of practice, was part of the illusion the whole time. I don't have a neat answer for you. I've stopped trusting the people who claim they do. But if you've ever felt that moment, the stillness that felt like arrival, and then that quiet crack of doubt underneath it, comment the words, "I felt the crack." I want to know how many of you have actually stood at this exact edge, because I don't think it's as rare as we all assume, and I think most people have never had the words for it until right now. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper into what the ancient world tried so hard to protect, hidden in jars, buried in sand, waiting 1500 years for someone to dig it back up. Because the last test isn't passed with more knowledge. It's past the moment you stop needing to be the one who passed it.